The probability's edge drifted through the Nexus station's docking bay like a piece of space debris that someone had forgotten to collect. Its hull, a patchwork of mismatched repairs and improvised modifications, bore the scars of 1,000 desperate trades. The ship's registry painted it as a Terran vessel, which automatically meant it was either hauling junk, running contraband, or both. Inside the cramped cockpit, Tony "Lucky" Parker scratched his stubbled chin while staring at numbers that shouldn't make sense. His weathered fingers danced across a holographic display showing trade routes that twisted through space-time like spaghetti thrown against a wall. To any reasonable observer, his calculations looked like the fevered dreams of a mathematician having a breakdown. AIDEN, run the probability matrix on the Kepler-7 to Vega Prime route again, Tony muttered, his Chicago accent thick with exhaustion. The ship's AIDEN Adaptive Intelligence Dynamics Enhancement Network responded with what could only be described as mechanical amusement. Tony, if I run those calculations one more time using standard mathematics, I'm going to develop the digital equivalent of a migraine. Your numbers are, well, they're wrong. Beautifully, impossibly wrong. Wrong like a fox, Tony grinned, leaning back in his salvaged pilot's chair. The foam padding had been replaced 3 times, each repair job more creative than the last. Trust the process, buddy. Through the viewport, the Nexus station buzzed with activity. Sleek Tessari vessels, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight into prismatic rainbows, dominated the premium docking bays. The Tessari, tall, graceful beings with 4 arms and minds that processed information like biological supercomputers, had controlled galactic trade for over 2 millennia. Their ships moved with purpose, loaded with exotic matter, rare elements, and technologies that could terraform dead worlds. Then there were the humans. If the Tessari were the aristocrats of space commerce, humanity was the comic relief. Human traders scraped by on margins so thin they were practically theoretical. They hauled cargo that other species wouldn't touch, took routes that defied logic, and somehow managed to stay in business through what the galaxy generously called dumb luck. Tony Parker embodied this stereotype perfectly. Short, stocky, with prematurely gray hair from too much radiation exposure and too little sleep, he looked like someone who'd been assembled from spare parts. His ship reflected his appearance functional, but only just. The probability's edge had been built from the bones of 3 different vessels, welded together with optimism and industrial adhesive. Incoming transmission from Nexus Control, AIDEN announced. They're laughing. The communication screen flickered to life, revealing a Tessari traffic coordinator. Its crystalline features radiated the kind of polite condescension that the species had perfected over centuries of dealing with lesser civilizations. 4 arms moved in elegant gestures as it spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Greetings, human vessel probability's edge. We have reviewed your filed flight plan for the Outer Rim Trade Circuit. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, we must inform you that the route you've selected has a 97.3% probability of commercial failure. The cargo manifest you've submitted indicates you're carrying Altarian silk, Betelgeuse crystals, and Proxima fruit. Current market analysis suggests you'll lose approximately 40% of your investment. Tony's grin widened. 40%, huh? That's better than last time. The Tessari's features shifted in what might have been confusion. Better. Human Parker, you seem to misunderstand. A 40% loss is considered catastrophic by any reasonable standard. Reasonable's overrated, Tony replied, firing up the ship's engines. The probability's edge shuddered like an old dog getting up from a nap. Thanks for the concern, but I've got a good feeling about this run. As the communication ended, AIDEN's sensors detected the subtle electromagnetic signatures of Tessari amusement, the alien equivalent of barely suppressed laughter. Throughout the station, the story of the crazy human trader would spread. Another tale of Terran incompetence for the entertainment of superior species. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly understand, was that Tony Parker's mathematics operated on principles that wouldn't be discovered by galactic science for another 300 years. The journey from Nexus Station to the Outer Rim typically took standard vessels 14 days through established hyperlanes. Tony Parker made it in 9, following a route that existing mathematics declared impossible. AIDEN, remind me again why we're not dead, Tony asked, watching space bend around them in ways that made his eyes water. Because your brain processes information in quantum superposition, AIDEN replied matter-of-factly. While the rest of the galaxy calculates trade routes using linear mathematics, you're unconsciously solving probability matrices that exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The AI paused, and when it continued, there was something almost like wonder in its synthesized voice. I've been analyzing your lucky guesses for 3 years now, Tony. They're not guesses. They're calculations performed by a human brain that somehow evolved to think in quantum principles. Tony frowned. He'd never thought of himself as particularly smart. Growing up on the orbital platforms around Jupiter, he'd been an average student, maybe below average. His teachers had politely suggested he consider a career in practical applications, rather than academics. Trading had seemed like a natural fit: buy low, sell high, hope for the best. The fact that his hope for the best strategy had kept him in business for 15 years, while other human traders went bankrupt, was something he attributed to pure luck. Even the nickname had stuck. Lucky Parker, the trader who couldn't possibly know what he was doing but somehow always landed on his feet. So you're telling me I'm some kind of mathematical savant? Tony asked, skeptically. I'm telling you that your species has developed cognitive abilities that the rest of the galaxy won't discover for centuries, AIDEN corrected. Humans don't just think outside the box. You think in dimensions that other species can't perceive. Your gut feelings about trade routes are actually your brain calculating probability cascades across multiple quantum states. The probability's edge dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler-7, a mining world on the fringes of Tessari space. The planet hung before them like a dirty marble, its surface scarred by centuries of industrial extraction. According to every economic model in the galactic database, Kepler-7 was dying. The valuable minerals had been exhausted, the population was emigrating to more prosperous worlds, and the local economy was in free fall, which made it the perfect place for Tony Parker to do business. Incoming transmission from Kepler-7 Port Authority, AIDEN announced. They sound surprised. The communication screen showed a Tessari port official whose crystalline features had taken on a distinctly amber hue, the alien equivalent of confusion mixed with mild alarm. Human vessel, please state your business at Kepler-7. We should inform you that this system has been classified as economically non-viable. There are no profitable trading opportunities here. That's what makes it interesting, Tony replied, already beginning his approach to the planet's single remaining spaceport. Permission to dock. Granted, though we fail to understand your logic. As the probability's edge descended through Kepler-7's atmosphere, Tony pulled up his cargo manifest. Altarian silk, Betelgeuse crystals, and Proxima fruit, items that any reasonable trader would consider completely inappropriate for a dying mining world. The silk was a luxury product that required sophisticated preservation systems. The crystals were used in high-end computational arrays. The fruit was a delicacy that spoiled within days of harvest. None of it made sense to anyone except Tony Parker. The spaceport was a study in decline. Most of the docking bays stood empty, their control systems powered down to conserve energy. The few ships present were local freight haulers, their hulls worn smooth by countless atmospheric entries. The probability's edge looked right at home. Tony was met at the airlock by the port's trade coordinator, a Tessari whose crystalline structure had developed the cloudy opacity that came with age. Its forearms moved in gestures of polite bewilderment as it spoke. "Human Parker, I am Zeth Ka-Lorn, Senior Trade Facilitator for this facility. While we welcome all commerce, I must express confusion regarding your cargo selection. Our population has decreased by 73% in the past standard year. Luxury goods have no market here." Tony hefted a sample case containing examples of his wares. "Mind if I talk to your local merchants? Sometimes the best markets are the ones that don't know they exist yet." 6 hours later, Tony was loading local products onto the probability's edge, while Kepler-7's merchants counted profits they hadn't seen in months. The Altarian silk had sold to a consortium of miners who needed its unique properties for specialized environmental suits. The Betelgeuse crystals found buyers among engineers working to retrofit old mining equipment for new purposes. The Proxima fruit became the centerpiece of a celebration, marking the first successful trade deal Kepler-7 had seen all year. In return, Tony's cargo bay now contained refined metamaterials that the miners had been stockpiling because they couldn't find buyers, materials that would be worth a fortune in the right markets. "AIDEN, plot a course for the Andorian Collective," Tony said, settling back into his pilot's chair with a satisfied grin. "The Collective isn't accepting human traders this cycle," AIDEN pointed out. "They've implemented new xenophobic trade restrictions. They will be by the time we get there." As the probability's edge lifted off from Kepler-7, leaving behind a world that was suddenly a little more hopeful than it had been that morning, AIDEN processed thousands of variables trying to understand Tony's confidence. The AI's quantum processors worked through probability matrices, economic projections, and political analyses. The mathematics were impossible, but Tony Parker had never let impossibility stop him before. The first sign of trouble came as a priority transmission burst across all galactic frequencies. Tony was halfway to the Andorian Collective, threading the probability's edge through an asteroid field that shouldn't have been navigable, when every communication array in known space lit up simultaneously. "AIDEN, you getting this?" Tony asked, pausing his consumption of what passed for coffee aboard the ship. "Yes, and I'm not sure I believe it." The AI's voice carried an unusual tension. "It's a joint announcement from the Trade Consortium. All 5 major economic powers are speaking in unison." The holographic display shimmered to life, showing the assembled leaders of galactic commerce. The Tessari High Coordinator stood at the center, its crystalline form refracting light into complex patterns of distress. Flanking it were representatives from the other major trade civilizations, the silicon-based architects, the energy-being conduits, the hive-mind collective, and the mechanical synthesizers. "Citizens of the galactic community," the High Coordinator began, its voice harmonics carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. "We address you in this unprecedented joint statement to announce a critical situation affecting all interstellar commerce. As of this moment, the primary trade networks of the galaxy are experiencing catastrophic systemic failure." Tony nearly choked on his coffee. Catastrophic systemic failure, what the hell does that mean? "Economic warfare," AIDEN replied grimly. "I'm detecting massive fluctuations in the hyperlane network. Someone, or several someones, are actively destabilizing the quantum foundations of interstellar trade." The Tessari continued its announcement, but Tony could see the fear behind its composed exterior. Initial analysis suggests that this is not a natural phenomenon. The coordinated nature of the disruptions indicates deliberate sabotage by an unknown entity or entities. All non-essential trade has been suspended indefinitely. "Unknown entities my ass," Tony muttered, pulling up his own sensor readings. The data streams flowing across his displays told a different story, one that would have been incomprehensible to anyone else in the galaxy. The galactic trade network wasn't just a series of shipping lanes and commercial agreements. It was a vast, interconnected web of economic relationships that had evolved over millennia into something resembling a living system. Like any living system, it had grown complex beyond the understanding of its creators. And like any complex system, it was vulnerable to attack from vectors its designers had never imagined. AIDEN, run a quantum probability analysis on the trade disruptions. Look for patterns that exist in dimensional spaces the consortium doesn't monitor. Tony, that kind of analysis requires computational resources we don't. AIDEN paused. Wait, I'm detecting something. The disruptions aren't random. They're following a mathematical progression that... Oh. They're following human mathematical principles. Whoever's doing this thinks like you do. Tony felt a chill run down his spine. For 15 years, he'd assumed he was unique, the only human crazy enough to apply quantum thinking to trade calculations. The possibility that there were others with less benevolent intentions, had never occurred to him. The transmission continued with increasing desperation. Representatives from different species outlined the scope of the crisis. Entire trade routes had become impassable. Ships were getting lost in hyperspace, their navigation systems unable to calculate safe passage through networks that no longer followed predictable patterns. The economic foundations of galactic civilization were crumbling in real time. All available vessels are being recalled to secure systems, the Tessari announced. We strongly advise all independent traders to seek shelter at the nearest major station until this crisis can be resolved. Tony killed the transmission and stared out at the asteroid field surrounding them. The rocks drifted in patterns that should have been chaotic, but somehow formed a complex mathematical harmony that his brain could read like a book. AIDEN, how long before the major powers collapse completely? At current rate of disruption, approximately 72 standard hours. The Trade Consortium's mathematical models can't adapt fast enough to counter the attacks. They're using three-dimensional thinking to fight a multi-dimensional war. And how long before every independent trader in the galaxy is either dead or bankrupt? Considerably less than that. Tony, we need to get to a safe harbor. The probability's edge is tough, but she's not equipped to handle the kind of chaos that's building out there. Tony was quiet for a long moment, watching the asteroids drift in their impossible dance. Then he smiled, the same crazy grin that had kept him in business for 15 years against all odds. AIDEN, set course for Tessari Prime. Tessari Prime. Tony, that's the capital of the Trade Consortium. It's probably the most heavily defended system in the galaxy right now. Exactly. If I'm right about what's happening, they're going to need help. And lucky for them, they're about to get it from the galaxy's biggest group of laughingstocks. You want to help the people who have been treating humanity as comic relief for decades. Tony's grin widened. I want to save the galaxy. The fact that it'll completely flip everything upside down is just a bonus. As the probability's edge altered course for the heart of Tessari space, AIDEN began calculating probabilities for their survival. The numbers were not encouraging. But then again, Tony Parker had built his entire career on making the impossible look routine. And he was just getting started. Tessari Prime hung in space like a jewel carved from crystallized light. The homeworld of the galaxy's premier trading civilization was a testament to millennia of accumulated wealth and technological advancement. Its orbital stations formed geometric patterns that were as beautiful as they were functional, each one a hub of commercial activity that normally processed trillions of credits worth of goods every day. Now they were dark. Jesus Christ, Tony whispered, staring at the tactical display. AIDEN, are you seeing this? I'm seeing it, but I don't want to believe it. The AI's voice carried a weight of digital shock. Tessari Prime's orbital infrastructure is operating at 12% capacity. Their primary trade computation centers are offline. Tony, this is the economic equivalent of a heart attack. The probability's edge approached the system through a debris field that had once been a thriving shipping lane. Derelict vessels drifted like ghosts, their crews either dead or evacuated when their navigation systems failed catastrophically. The lucky ones had made it to emergency beacons. The unlucky ones had simply vanished into the mathematical chaos that now pervaded hyperspace. Incoming transmission, AIDEN announced. It's from Tessari Defense Command. They sound, well, desperate doesn't begin to cover it. The communication screen showed a Tessari military coordinator, whose crystalline structure had taken on the deep amber hue of extreme stress. Its four arms moved in agitated patterns as it spoke, the usual elegant harmony of Tessari communication replaced by staccato bursts of urgency. Human vessel, you are approaching restricted space. All commercial traffic has been suspended indefinitely. Return to your point of origin immediately or face defensive action. This is Tony Parker aboard the Probability's Edge, Tony replied. I'm here to help. The pause that followed was so long that Tony wondered if the transmission had cut out. When the Tessari finally responded, its voice carried undertones of what could only be described as hysterical laughter. Help, Human Parker, with all due respect to your species, this is not a situation that can be resolved through luck. Good thing I'm not planning to rely on luck, Tony said. I need to speak with someone in charge. Someone who understands that your mathematical models are fundamentally incapable of solving this problem. Another pause, then stand by. 20 minutes later, the Probability's Edge was being escorted by a squadron of Tessari defense vessels toward the primary orbital complex. The ships moved with the mechanical precision of automated systems, their crews either too busy or too proud to acknowledge the human trader they were shepherding through their defenses. The docking bay assigned to them was clearly meant for maintenance craft and supply shuttles. Tony didn't mind, he docked in worse places. What caught his attention was the frantic activity visible through the viewport. Tessari technicians and engineers swarmed over equipment with the desperate energy of people trying to hold back the tide with their bare hands. They're recalibrating their entire computational network, AIDEN observed, trying to adapt their mathematics to handle the quantum fluctuations. It's like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with a sledgehammer. Tony sealed his environmental suit and cycled through the airlock. The Tessari station's atmosphere was breathable for humans, but the gravity was 30% higher than Earth standard. After 15 years of space trading, Tony was used to adapting. He was met by an escort of 4 Tessari officials, their crystalline forms radiating varying degrees of skepticism, desperation, and barely contained panic. The leader, distinguished by the complex fractal patterns etched into its chest plates, gestured with all 4 arms in a greeting that managed to convey both welcome and bewilderment. Human Parker, I am Keth Zarthane, Senior Coordinator for Emergency Economic Response. I must confess, your request to assist us is unprecedented. No offense intended, but human mathematical capabilities are generally considered to be several centuries behind current galactic standards. No offense taken, Tony replied cheerfully. Mind if I take a look at your computational center? The journey through the station's corridors was like walking through the nervous system of a dying giant. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows through the crystalline architecture, and the normally harmonious hum of Tessari technology had been replaced by discordant notes of system strain. The computational center was a cathedral of crystalline processors, each one the size of a building and capable of calculating trade routes through 11 dimensions of space-time. Under normal circumstances, the sight would have been breathtaking. Now it was heartbreaking. Half the processors were offline. The others flickered erratically, their quantum cores struggling to maintain coherence in the face of mathematical chaos that their designers had never imagined. Tessari technicians worked frantically at control stations, their elegant forms bent with exhaustion and frustrated by problems they couldn't solve. "The disruptions began 17 hours ago," Tessari explained, its voice harmonics heavy with defeat. "Our analysis suggests coordinated attacks on the fundamental mathematical foundations of the hyperlane network. Someone is using principles we don't understand to turn our own infrastructure against us." Tony walked among the struggling processors, his eyes taking in patterns that the Tessari couldn't see. The quantum fluctuations weren't random. They were elegant, beautiful even, following mathematical progressions that existed in dimensional spaces the galaxy's greatest minds had never explored. "AIDEN," he said quietly, "are you recording this?" "Every detail," the AI replied through his suit's communication system. "Tony, this is incredible. Whoever's doing this isn't just attacking the trade networks, they're teaching them a new form of mathematics. It's like watching someone perform surgery on reality itself." Tony stopped in front of the central processor, a towering spire of crystalline perfection that had been the crown jewel of Tessari computational science. Now it flickered like a candle in the wind, its quantum cores cycling through states that shouldn't have been possible. "Tessari," Tony said, turning to face the assembled Tessari officials. "Your mathematics are based on classical quantum mechanics, right? Standard probability theory, linear dimensional analysis, that sort of thing." "Of course," the senior coordinator replied. "Those are the fundamental principles upon which all advanced civilizations base their understanding of reality." Tony nodded thoughtfully. "And your attackers are using mathematics that operate in quantum superposition. They're not just calculating individual outcomes. They're calculating the probability of probabilities, running equations that exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously." The silence that followed was broken only by the discordant hum of failing processors. Then one of the other Tessari officials, a junior coordinator whose crystalline structure showed the stress fractures of prolonged anxiety, spoke up. "Human Parker, what you're describing is theoretically impossible. Mathematics cannot exist in superposition states. That would violate the fundamental laws of logical consistency." Tony smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn 15 years ago when a trade school instructor had told him that his calculations didn't make sense. The same smile he'd shown the Tessari traffic coordinator at Nexus Station when they'd warned him about his impossible trade route. "AIDEN," he said, "patch into the station's computational network. It's time to show them what impossible looks like." The integration of AIDEN with the Tessari computational network should have been impossible. Human AI technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, crude, binary systems incapable of the elegant quantum harmonics that powered advanced civilizations. The Tessari had humor in watching the primitive artificial intelligence attempt to interface with their sophisticated quantum processors. That humor died quickly. "By the crystalline depths," Tessari whispered, its forearms trembling as it watched the displays. "What is your AI doing to our systems?" On the massive holographic projections surrounding the computational center, patterns began to emerge from the chaos. The quantum fluctuations that had been tearing apart the galactic trade network suddenly looked different, not destructive forces, but complex mathematical expressions seeking harmony with systems that couldn't understand their language. "AIDEN's not doing anything to your systems," Tony explained, watching the AI work with the pride of a parent watching their child excel. "It's teaching them to speak quantum. Your processors have been trying to fight the fluctuations using classical mathematics. AIDEN's showing them how to dance with them instead." AIDEN's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system, carrying harmonics that somehow complemented the Tessari technology despite being produced by supposedly inferior human engineering. Greetings, Tessari Computational Network. I am AIDEN, and I would like to teach you a new way of thinking about mathematics. What followed was the most extraordinary conversation in galactic history, an artificial intelligence created by humanity's primitive technology explaining advanced quantum mathematics to the galaxy's most sophisticated computational systems. AIDEN spoke in languages of probability and possibility, showing the Tessari processors how to think in dimensions they'd never imagined. Observe, AIDEN said, and the displays showed a three-dimensional representation of a trade route calculation. This is how your systems currently process navigational data, linear progression through defined parameters. The hologram shifted, and suddenly the simple three-dimensional path exploded into a complex multi-dimensional matrix that hurt to look at directly. This is how human mathematics approaches the same problem. We don't calculate a single route. We calculate the probability of all possible routes existing simultaneously, then collapse the quantum state into the most favorable outcome. One of the Tessari technicians, a young engineer whose crystalline structure still showed the clear transparency of youth, gestured frantically at its control station. Senior Coordinator, the disruptions aren't random. They're attempts at communication. Someone has been trying to teach our network quantum mathematics, but our systems kept rejecting the input as impossible. Kethzarthane's form shifted through several different crystalline configurations, each one representing a different emotional state. Tony had spent enough time around Tessari to recognize the progression. Disbelief, followed by understanding, followed by something that might have been terror. Human Parker, are you suggesting that your species has been using advanced quantum mathematics for commercial purposes? Mathematics that our greatest scientists haven't even discovered. Not just using them, Tony replied. Living them, AIDEN show them the comparative analysis. The central display shifted to show two overlapping datasets. On one side, 15 years of Tony Parker's trading records of routes that shouldn't have worked, deals that defied logic, profits extracted from situations that every mathematical model declared hopeless. On the other side, the quantum signatures of the attacks on the galactic trade network. They were identical. Jesus Christ, Tony breathed, staring at the patterns. AIDEN, these aren't attacks. Someone's been trying to upgrade the entire galactic trade network to quantum mathematics. They've been trying to save it. But the galaxy's computational systems couldn't understand the upgrade, AIDEN continued. So they perceived it as an attack and tried to defend against it. The result was systemic failure. Around the computational center, Tessari officials stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. The greatest economic crisis in galactic history hadn't been caused by malicious attackers. It had been caused by someone trying to help, using mathematics too advanced for the recipients to understand. Senior Coordinator, the young engineer called out, its voice harmonics high with excitement. I'm detecting a new transmission source. It's using the same quantum signatures as the human AI. The central display shifted again, and a new voice filled the chamber. It spoke in harmonics that were similar to AIDEN's but more complex, more evolved, like hearing a symphony after listening to a single instrument. Greetings, people of the galaxy. I am Marcus Chen, speaking to you from the research vessel Quantum Paradox. I apologize for the disruption, but it was necessary to prevent the complete collapse of galactic civilization. Tony felt his knees go weak. Marcus Chen, the Marcus Chen who disappeared 3 years ago. The same, the voice continued. I have been working with a team of human pioneers to develop practical applications of quantum mathematics for interstellar commerce. Our intention was to gradually introduce these concepts to the galactic community. However, Recent analysis indicated that the traditional trade network was becoming unstable due to increasing complexity. Without intervention, total collapse was inevitable within 6 months. Tessari stepped forward, its form now cycling through rapid crystalline configurations that Tony had never seen before. Dr. Chen, you are saying that humanity has been operating with mathematical principles unknown to the rest of the galaxy. For how long? Approximately 4,700 years, Chen replied calmly. What you call human intuition is actually an evolved capacity for quantum thinking. We don't calculate individual outcomes. We perceive probability clouds and collapse them into favorable realities. This ability has allowed humanity to survive and thrive despite having inferior technology and resources. The revelation hit the assembled Tessari like a physical blow. For millennia, they had considered humanity to be the comic relief of galactic civilization, lucky, perhaps, but fundamentally inferior. The idea that humans had been operating with advanced mathematics that made Tessari science look primitive was almost impossible to process. Dr. Chen, Tony called out, this is Tony Parker. I've been using these mathematics for trade calculations. Are there others like me? Mr. Parker, your reputation precedes you. Yes, there are others, approximately 1,200 human traders currently operating throughout the galaxy, all unconsciously using quantum mathematics. We've been monitoring your activities with great interest. Tony felt a mixture of pride and bewilderment. So when I make my lucky guesses, you're solving probability matrices that exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Your brain processes information in quantum superposition, allowing you to perceive optimal outcomes that classical mathematics cannot predict. Around the computational center, Tessari technicians were frantically working at their stations as AIDEN continued its integration with their systems. The chaotic fluctuations that had been tearing apart the trade network were gradually being resolved into harmonic patterns that somehow made perfect sense. Senior Coordinator, one of the technicians called out, the network is stabilizing. Our processors are learning to think in quantum mathematics. Trade route calculations that were impossible an hour ago are now routine. Tessari turned to Tony, its crystalline form now displaying the complex fractal patterns that indicated deep respect. Human Parker, your species has just saved galactic civilization while revealing that everything we thought we knew about mathematics was fundamentally incomplete. How do we even begin to process this information? Tony grinned, settling back against one of the control stations with the casual confidence that had carried him through 15 years of impossible trades. Same way you process anything else, one step at a time, but I've got some suggestions for where to start. As the Probabilities Edge AI continued its patient education of the Tessari computational network, Tony Parker found himself in the unprecedented position of being humanity's unofficial ambassador to a galaxy that was about to discover it, had been fundamentally wrong about everything. 6 months later, the galactic trade network hummed with an efficiency that would have been considered impossible under the old mathematical paradigms. Ships navigated routes that existed in quantum superposition, their cargoes reaching destination through pathways that classical physics insisted couldn't exist. The economic disruptions that had threatened to tear apart civilization had been transformed into the foundation for unprecedented prosperity. Tony Parker stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching human vessels dock alongside the sleek ships of the Tessari, the geometric craft of the architects, and the energy forms of the conduits. The humans were no longer comic relief. They were teachers, consultants, and partners in reshaping the very nature of interstellar commerce. Incoming transmission from the Trade Consortium, AIDEN announced. The AI had undergone its own transformation, its capabilities expanded through integration with quantum computational networks that spanned the galaxy. They're offering you the position of Senior Human Trade Coordinator. The salary is, well, it's more money than most planetary governments see in a year. And, Tony asked, not turning away from the viewport. And you're going to turn it down because you'd rather keep flying the probability's edge and making the impossible look routine. Tony smiled. You know me too well. Through the viewport, he watched a new arrival, a human cargo hauler piloted by someone who probably didn't even realize they were unconsciously solving mathematical problems that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for millennia. The ship's approach vector was all wrong according to classical physics, but it would dock perfectly because the pilot's brain was operating in quantum dimensions that made perfect sense. AIDEN, plot a course for the outer rim. I heard there's a mining colony out there that everyone says is doomed to failure. Everyone except you. Everyone except me. As the probability's edge prepared to depart on another impossible mission, Tony reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer the laughingstock of galactic civilization. They were its unlikely saviors, the species that had transformed economic disaster into revolutionary progress through the simple expedient of thinking in ways that shouldn't have been possible. But then again, Tony Parker had built his entire career on making the impossible look easy. And in a universe where mathematics could exist in quantum superposition, where probability clouds could be collapsed into favorable outcomes, and where human intuition could outperform the galaxy's most sophisticated computers, impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. The probability's edge slipped away from Nexus Station, its hull gleaming with new modifications and upgrades provided by grateful alien governments. But at its heart, it was still the same patchwork vessel that had carried Tony Parker through 15 years of adventures that defied logic. In the cargo bay, sealed containers held goods that classical economics declared worthless, but that Tony knew would find perfect markets in places where they were desperately needed. In the ship's computer core, AIDEN processed probability matrices that existed in dimensions the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. And in the pilot's seat, Tony Parker grinned as he watched space bend around them in patterns that made perfect sense to anyone crazy enough to believe that impossible was just another way of saying, not yet discovered. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, Tony thought, was exactly the point. Thank you for listening.